A hurricane trapped us in my bar. By morning, I had kicked a billionaire out into the street. He tried to pay me. I said no. That decision changed everything. The smell of ozone and wet asphalt was always the first warning. It was a thick, metallic scent that coated the back of your throat long before the first drop of rain actually fell. Maya Torres ripped a strip of silver duct tape from the roll, the adhesive screeching in protest, and slapped it across the plywood covering the main window of Saltwater Soul. She smoothed it down with the heel of her hand, ignoring the way her muscles burned. It was 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the sky over the Florida Keys had already turned a bruised, ugly purple. This wasn't just a storm. This was Hurricane Alina, and she was angry. Inside the bar, the air was heavy and still. Lena, Maya's best friend and the only bartender who could mix a mojito while dancing salsa, was currently wrestling a patio chair through the front door. Lena grunted as she shoved the metal legs over the threshold. She said, usually when people say they want to get swept off their feet, they don't mean by a Category 3 hurricane. Maya wiped a stray lock of dark, frizzy hair from her forehead. She said, "Less jokes, more lifting, Lena. We have maybe an hour before the bridge closes." Maya looked toward the corner booth. Captain Joe was still there. He was nursing a lukewarm beer, looking at the radar on the television with the skepticism of a man who had survived 3 wives and 6 hurricanes. Maya walked over and placed both hands flat on the sticky wooden table. She said, "Joe, you have to go. The shelter at the high school closes its doors at 8 p.m. Captain Joe did not look up. He said, "I sat through Andrew in 92. I sat through Irma." "This is just a little wind, Maya." Maya snatched his beer away. She said, "This is not a debate. I'm not having your death on my conscience. My mother would haunt me. Now get up, get in your truck, and go." The old man grumbled something that sounded like a curse, but the steel in Maya's voice made him move. That was the thing about Maya Torres. She looked soft, big brown eyes, curves that filled out her jeans, but she had a spine made of reinforced concrete. She had to. You didn't keep a struggling beach bar alive for 3 years after your father died by being soft. By 7:45 p.m., the bar was empty. The chairs were stacked. The bottles were secured. The wind was starting to pick up now. It whistled through the cracks in the old building, a high, mournful sound that made the hair on Maya's arms stand up. Rain began to hammer against the roof, sounding like handfuls of gravel being thrown by an angry giant. Lena grabbed her keys. She shouted over the rising noise, "Come to my mom's house. We have a generator and wine." Maya shook her head. She pointed to the ceiling. She said, "I have to stay. The roof leaked last time. If I'm not here to empty the buckets, the floor will warp. I'll be fine upstairs." "Go." Lena hesitated, then hugged her tightly. She said, "Be safe. Call me if the signal holds." Then Lena was gone, vanishing into the gray curtain of rain. Maya locked the heavy oak door. The lock engaged with a solid, mechanical thud. She was alone, or so she thought. 10 minutes later, the storm truly arrived. The wind wasn't whistling anymore, it was screaming. It battered the walls of the bar, making the old wood groan. Maya was behind the bar, moving the cash register to a higher shelf when a sudden, violent noise came from the front entrance. It wasn't the wind. It was the distinct, heavy sound of a fist pounding against the wood. Maya froze. The pounding came again, desperate and frantic. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept under the counter, a souvenir from the '97 World Series, and marched to the door. She unlocked it and cracked it open an inch. The wind caught the door and ripped it from her grip, slamming it against the inside wall with a force that shook the floor. 2 figures stumbled in, carried by a gust of rain and leaves. Maya shoved the door closed, throwing her entire body weight against it to fight the pressure, and finally managed to turn the deadbolt. She turned around, bat raised. Standing in the middle of her bar, dripping water onto her clean floor, were 2 people who looked like they had just stepped off the cover of a magazine and then fallen into a swimming pool. The man was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than Maya's car, now ruined and clinging to his broad shoulders. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes, a piercing, icy blue, were wide with adrenaline. Clinging to his arm was an older woman. She was petite, with silver hair that had been perfectly coiffed but was now a wet mess. She wore a silk blouse and pearls, and she was shaking so hard her teeth were audibly chattering. The man looked at Maya. He didn't say thank you. He didn't apologize for almost breaking her door. He barked, "I need a phone. Ours are dead." Maya lowered the bat slowly, but she didn't put it away. She said, "Hello to you too." And no. The man blinked, water dripping from his eyelashes. He said, "Excuse me." Maya said, "No phone. The landline went down 20 minutes ago, and unless you have a satellite uplink in that fancy suit, cell towers are out too." The man ran a hand through his wet hair, a gesture of pure frustration. He said, "This is unacceptable. We need to call a car. Our vehicle stalled in the floodwaters about a mile back." Maya almost laughed. She said, "A car? Mister, look outside. The road is a river. The bridge is closed. Nobody is coming. You are stuck here." The older woman let out a small, pained sound and swayed on her feet. Maya's annoyance vanished instantly. She dropped the bat and rushed forward, catching the woman by the elbow before she could fall. Up close, Maya could see the woman's lips were turning a dangerous shade of blue. Maya said, "She's hypothermic. We need to get her warm. Now." The man stepped in, trying to take charge. He said, "I can handle her." "We just need," Maya cut him off with a look that could have sliced glass. She said, "You are shivering too, and you look like you have never handled anything without an instruction manual in your life. Sit her down on that bench. Take off her wet shoes. I am going to get towels." For a second, the man looked like he was going to argue. He squared his jaw, his eyes narrowing. But then he looked at the woman, his grandmother presumably, and the fight went out of him. He nodded once, stiffly. Maya ran to the back room. She grabbed a stack of clean bar towels and the emergency fleece blankets she kept for hurricane season. When she returned, the man was kneeling in front of the woman, chafing her cold hands between his. It was a surprisingly tender gesture for someone who had just tried to order a car in the middle of a natural disaster. Maya knelt beside them. She wrapped a thick blanket around the woman's shoulders. She said, "Ma'am, can you hear me? I'm Maya. I need you to focus on me." The woman looked up. Her eyes were the same shade of blue as the man's, but warmer. She whispered, I'm a leaner, and this is my grandson, Ethan." Maya smiled gently. She said, "Nice to meet you, Alina." Even if the timing is terrible, she looked at Ethan. He was hovering, looking useless and angry about it. Maya threw a towel at his chest. He caught it by reflex. She said, "Dry off. If you get sick, I am not nursing you. I have enough to worry about with the roof." Ethan glared at her, but he began to dry his face. He said, "Is there a hotel nearby? Somewhere with a generator?" Maya stood up, hands on her hips. She said, "Mister, you are in a beach bar in the Florida Keys during a Category 3 hurricane. The nearest hotel is 5 miles away underwater. My apartment is upstairs. It is small, it is messy, but it is dry. That is your only option." Ethan looked around the bar. He took in the neon beer signs, the fishing nets on the walls, the worn vinyl booths. He looked like he was afraid he might catch a disease just by breathing the air. He said, "Your apartment." Maya rolled her eyes. She said, "Yes, my apartment, unless you prefer sleeping on the pool table. Now help her up." They moved slowly up the narrow wooden staircase at the back of the bar. The wind hammered against the building, making the whole structure sway slightly, like a ship at sea. Maya's apartment was exactly as she had described. It was a studio crammed with books, plants, and colorful throw pillows. A small kitchenette was in one corner, and a large, comfortable bed was in the other. Maya guided Alina to the armchair. She said, "I'm going to find you some dry clothes." She dug through her dresser. She pulled out a pair of sweatpants and a soft, oversized cardigan. She hesitated. The cardigan had belonged to her mother. It was cashmere, soft, and smelling faintly of lavender. It was one of the few nice things she had left. She handed it to Alina. She said, "Put this on. It is warm. Ethan was standing in the middle of the room, dripping onto her rug. He looked large and out of place, like a Great Dane in a Chihuahua's kennel. Maya tossed him a pair of oversized basketball shorts and a University of Miami hoodie. She said, "These belong to my ex. Burn them when you are done for all I care. Just get out of that wet suit." Ethan looked at the hoodie with distaste. He said, "I would prefer to keep mine." Maya pointed a finger at him. She said, "If you drip one more drop of water on my grandmother's rug, I will throw you back out into the storm. Change. Bathroom is on the left." While Ethan changed, Maya heated up 2 cans of tomato soup on her gas camping stove. The power had officially died 10 minutes ago, plunging the room into darkness. She lit candles, placing them safely in jars around the room. The flickering light softened the edges of the cluttered apartment. It made the space feel intimate, enclosed. When Ethan emerged, he looked ridiculous. The basketball shorts were too short, showing off muscular calves, and the hoodie was tight across his chest. But he also looked human. The armor of the suit was gone. He sat on the floor near Alina's feet. Alina was sipping the soup from a mug, color finally returning to her cheeks. Alina said, "This is delicious, my dear. What is the secret ingredient?" Maya sat cross-legged on the bed. She said, "Canned sodium and desperation." Alina let out a laugh. It was a bright, genuine sound. She said, "You have a sharp tongue, Maya. I like it." Ethan was not eating. He was staring at the bookshelf next to him. He reached out and pulled a book from the stack. He said, "The Lean Startup, 0 to 1. He looked at Maya, his eyebrows raised in genuine surprise. He said, "You read business strategy." Maya felt a flush of defensiveness heat her neck. She snatched the book back from him. She said, "Just because I pour drinks doesn't mean I can't read, Einstein." Ethan held up his hands. He said, "I didn't say that. It is just unexpected." Maya set the book down. She said, "I was 2 semesters away from my MBA at the University of Miami when my dad got sick. Pancreatic cancer. It moves fast." She looked at the candle flame, watching it dance. She continued, "He put everything into this bar. Saltwater Soul was his dream. When he died, the debts were substantial. I couldn't let the bank take it, so I came home." There was a silence in the room. The only sound was the howling of the wind outside and the steady rhythm of rain against the window pane. Alina reached out and patted Maya's knee. She said, "You are a good daughter. Family is everything. Isn't that right, Ethan?" Ethan looked at his grandmother. His expression was unreadable, guarded. He said, "Yes, family is the priority." Maya looked at him. In the candlelight, the arrogance seemed to have drained out of him. He looked tired. He looked like a man who carried a weight he couldn't put down. She asked, "So what were you 2 doing on the old highway in a hurricane?" "The evacuation order went out yesterday." Ethan sighed. He rubbed the back of his neck. He said, "We were in Key West for a meeting, a negotiation. It ran long. I thought we could beat the storm. I miscalculated." Maya scoffed. She said, "You miscalculated a hurricane. That is a new one." Ethan looked at her, and for the first time a small, crooked smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It changed his whole face. He suddenly looked younger, less severe. He said, "I am used to things running on my schedule." Nature apparently didn't get the memo. Maya felt a strange little flutter in her chest. She ignored it. She said, "Nature is the only boss you can't fire, mister." Alina yawned, a delicate, exhausted sound. Maya stood up. She said, "You take the bed, Alina." Clean. Ethan stood up immediately. He said, "I will take the floor." Maya grabbed a spare pillow and a quilt. She threw them at him. She said, obviously, "That night was long. The storm raged for hours." Maya slept in the armchair, curled up in a ball. But every time the thunder detonated overhead, shaking the floorboards, she opened her eyes. From her spot, she could see Ethan. He wasn't sleeping. He was sitting up against the wall, watching his grandmother breathe. He was keeping guard. Maya watched him. She saw the way he tucked the blanket around Alina when she stirred. She saw the worry etched into his forehead. He was arrogant. He was bossy. He was clearly rich enough to be a problem, but he loved his grandmother. Maya closed her eyes. She thought, "Don't get ideas, Maya. He is a tourist. Tomorrow he leaves and you go back to mopping floors." The morning came with a silence that was almost louder than the storm. Maya woke up to sunlight streaming through the window. It was bright, harsh, and revealing. She stretched, her back cracking. The armchair had not been kind to her spine. She looked around. Alina was already awake, folding the quilt on the bed with military precision. Ethan was standing by the window, looking out at the street below. He was back in his dried suit pants and dress shirt, though they were wrinkled and stiff from the salt water. The magic of the candlelight was gone. He looked like a CEO again. Maya stood up. She said, mourning. Did the roof hold? Ethan turned. His face was a mask of professional detachment. He said, the structure seems intact. The water has receded significantly. I believe we can leave. Maya felt a sudden, sharp disappointment. She pushed it down. She said, good. I need to check the bar damage anyway. They went downstairs. The bar had survived mostly. There was some water near the door and a few shingles were missing, but compared to what could have happened, it was a miracle. Lena was already there. She had walked over from her mom's house and was sweeping debris from the patio. When Lena saw Maya, she screamed, Maya, you're alive. Then she saw Ethan and Alina walking out behind her. Lena's jaw dropped. She stopped sweeping. She stared. Ethan walked to the front of the room. He reached into his suit jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. He walked up to Maya. His posture was rigid. He pulled out a stack of crisp $100 bills. It was thick. He held it out to her. He said, this should cover your hospitality and the damage to your door. Maya looked at the money. There had to be at least $5,000 there. $5,000, that was 2 months of rent. That was the repairs for the ice machine. She looked at his face. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't looking her in the eye. He was treating this like a transaction, like she was a vending machine that had dispensed a service. A cold, hard knot formed in Maya's stomach. The warmth she had felt last night watching him care for his grandmother evaporated. She stepped back. She put her hands behind her back. She said, put that away. Ethan frowned. He said, it is not enough. I can write a check. Maya's voice dropped an octave. She said, I said, put it away. I didn't help you for money. I helped you because you were drowning. Ethan looked confused. He said, take it. You clearly need it. You said yourself the business is struggling. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Lena gasped audibly from the doorway. Maya felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't embarrassment, it was fury. She said, my business is none of your concern, and neither is my bank account. In this bar, we help neighbors. We don't take tips for saving lives. She walked to the door and pulled it open. The hinges groaned. She pointed outside. She said, the water is low enough for an SUV. Goodbye, mister. Alina stepped forward. She looked mortified. She said, Maya, please. He didn't mean to insult you. He is just. Ethan cut her off. He said, let's go, grandmother. The car service is waiting at the bridge. He shoved the money back into his pocket. He looked at Maya one last time. There was something in his eyes, confusion, regret. It was hard to tell. He said, thank you, but it sounded stiff, forced. They walked out into the bright, humid morning. Maya watched them go. She slammed the door shut, ignoring the way it rattled. Lena rushed over. She grabbed Maya's arm. She said, Maya, oh my God, do you know who that was? Maya grabbed a broom. She started sweeping aggressively. She said, a rude tourist with a bad haircut. Lena pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen frantically. She shoved it in Maya's face. She said, look. Maya looked. It was a picture on a news website. The headline read, Tech mogul Ethan Whitmore announces new artificial intelligence initiative. The photo showed Ethan. He was wearing a tuxedo, holding a glass of champagne, looking out at the world like he owned it. Next to him was Alina, listed as Alina Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Technologies. Lena shrieked, that was Ethan Whitmore. Maya, he is worth $4 billion. Maya stared at the phone. $4 billion. She thought about the can of tomato soup she had fed him. She thought about him sleeping on her floor in her ex-boyfriend's hoodie. She thought about the $5,000 she had just turned down. She felt like she was going to throw up. She handed the phone back to Lena. She said, I don't care if he is the king of England. He is an ass. But as she went back to sweeping, Maya couldn't stop her hands from shaking. She had just kicked a billionaire out of her bar. And the worst part, she missed the smell of his cologne. It was cedar and rain. 2 weeks later, the humidity in the Florida Keys was back to its usual suffocating weight. The storm debris had been cleared, the plywood was off the windows, and Saltwater Soul was back in business. Maya was behind the bar, crushing mint leaves into a glass with a wooden pestle. The bar was packed. Tourists who had fled the hurricane had returned with a vengeance, thirsty for rum and bad decisions. Maya wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. She shouted, "Lena, 2 mojitos and a darkly stormy for table 6. Lena didn't answer. Maya turned around, annoyed. She said, "Lena, did you hear?" She stopped. Lena was standing by the ice machine, mouth slightly open, but she wasn't the one holding the tray of drinks. Alina Whitmore was. The billionaire matriarch was wearing a pair of linen trousers and a simple white blouse, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She held the tray with the steady hands of a surgeon. Alina smiled at the stunned room. She said, "Table 6, coming right up." She glided past Maya, navigated the crowded floor, and set the drinks down with a flourish. She charmed the sunburned tourists, laughed at their terrible jokes, and cleared the empty glasses. Maya stood frozen, the mint pestle dangling from her hand. She marched over to Lena. She hissed, "Why is the founder of Whitmore Technologies bussing tables in my bar?" Lena whispered. She just walked in. She said she was bored at the resort and wanted to feel useful. What was I supposed to do? Tackle her? "She is a national treasure," Maya groaned. She walked out from behind the bar and intercepted Alina near the kitchen. Maya said, "Alina, what are you doing?" Alina stacked 3 dirty plates. She said, helping. "You are short-staffed, and frankly, if I spend 1 more hour at the resort listening to wealthy people complain about the humidity, I will throw myself into the ocean." Maya tried to take the plates. She said, "You cannot work here. You have people for this." Alina held onto the plates firmly. She said, "I started waiting tables in Savannah in 1962, my dear. I haven't lost my touch. Now go attend to the customer at the end of the bar. He has been watching you for 10 minutes. Maya frowned. She turned around. The breath left her lungs in a rush. Ethan was sitting on the last stool. He wasn't wearing the suit. He wasn't wearing the wet, ruined clothes from the storm. He was wearing a dark navy t-shirt that fit him perfectly, hugging his biceps in a way that felt like a personal attack on Maya's sanity. He wore faded jeans and leather sandals. He looked relaxed. He looked like he belonged here. Maya smoothed her apron, hating that her heart had just performed a gymnastics routine in her chest. She walked over. She said, "We don't serve billionaires here. Bad for the vibe." Ethan looked up. His blue eyes were clear, amused. He picked up a coaster and spun it on the bar top. He said, "Good thing I am just a guy looking for a beer." Maya crossed her arms. She said, "Did you come to try and give me money again? Because I have a bat and I am not afraid to use it." Ethan winced. He said, "I deserved that." He stopped spinning the coaster. He looked her right in the eye. He said, "I am sorry about the money. It was insulting. I treat problems like equations. I solve them with resources. I didn't see you. I just saw a debt to be paid. I was wrong." The apology was simple, no excuses, no corporate jargon. Maya felt her defenses lower just an inch. She grabbed a bottle of local lager, popped the cap, and slid it toward him. She said, "On the house, consider the debt settled." Ethan took a sip. He watched her. He said, "My grandmother refuses to leave. She says this place has," he used air quotes, "authentic energy." Maya laughed. She said, "That is code for it smells like old wood and stale beer." Ethan smiled. It was a real smile this time, showing straight white teeth. He said, "Maybe, but she is right. It is peaceful." He paused. He said, "When is your break?" Maya blinked. She said, "My what?" Ethan checked his watch. He said, "Sunset is in 20 minutes. Walk with me." Maya looked at the bar. It was chaotic. Glasses were clinking. Music was blaring. She looked at Alina, who was currently teaching Lena the proper way to fold a napkin. Alina caught Maya's eye and made a shooing motion with her hand. Maya untied her apron. She tossed it onto the counter. She said, 10 minutes. If you try to buy me a car, I am pushing you into the water." The beach behind the bar was narrow, a strip of crushed shell and white sand. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and pink. They walked near the water line, shoes in hand. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was comfortable. Ethan said, "You mentioned you wanted to expand. The community hub idea." Maya kicked at a piece of driftwood. She said, "You saw my vision board, that was private." Ethan shrugged. He said, "It was taped to your wall, hard to miss. It is a good business model. Social entrepreneurship increases brand loyalty." Maya stopped. She looked at him. She said, "It is not about brand loyalty, Ethan. It is about the kids in this neighborhood. Their parents work 2 jobs. They have nowhere to go after school. They get into trouble. If I could build a space, art classes, coding workshops, just a safe place to be, it changes the trajectory of the whole community." She realized she was waving her hands. She dropped them. She said, "But banks don't lend to bars with fluctuating revenue streams. So it is just a dream." Ethan was looking at her. The sun caught the angles of his face. He looked intense, focused. He said, "It shouldn't be just a dream. It is necessary." He took a step closer. The air between them suddenly felt very thin. The sound of the ocean seemed to fade into the background. Ethan reached out. He tucked a loose curl of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her jawline. His skin was warm. He whispered, "You are remarkable, Maya." Maya's breath hitched. She looked up at him. She saw the hunger in his eyes. It mirrored her own. She tilted her head up. Ethan leaned down. The distance closed. Their lips were millimeters apart. Maya closed her eyes, ready. Suddenly, a vibration cut through the moment. It was a sharp, persistent buzzing from Ethan's pocket. Ethan froze. He pulled back, a look of annoyance crossing his face. He pulled out his phone. He looked at the screen. His expression changed instantly. The softness vanished. The CEO returned. He said, "It is Vanessa, my VP of operations. I have to take this. It is urgent." Maya stepped back, cold air rushing into the space between them. She wrapped her arms around herself. She said, "Go." Business never sleeps, right? Ethan looked at her, torn, but the phone kept vibrating. He said, "I am sorry. 1 minute." He walked up the beach, answering the phone with a sharp, "Vanessa, what is it?" Maya stood alone by the water. The sunset suddenly looked less romantic and more like a warning. She thought, "Remember this feeling, Maya. You are the vacation. The phone call is the reality." 3 days later, the invitation arrived. It wasn't an email. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope hand-delivered by a courier. Inside was an invitation to the Whitmore Technologies annual charity gala at the Royal Palm Hotel in Miami Beach. There was a handwritten note from Alina. "Maya, please come. I need a friendly face in a sea of sharks. Ethan will be so pleased." Maya stood in the middle of her apartment, holding the card. Lena shrieked from the kitchen. She said, "You are going. This is it. The Cinderella moment." Maya sat on the bed. She said, "Lena, I own flip-flops. I do not own a gala gown. People like Ethan. They date models, actresses. They don't date bartenders who smell like lime juice." Lena grabbed her keys. She said, "Get in the car. We are going to the vintage store in Little Havana. We are going to make you look like a queen on a budget." And they did. The dress was a find. A vintage 1950s emerald green silk gown. It was simple, elegant, and hugged Maya's curves like it had been sewn onto her body. It cost $40 and a lot of dry cleaning. On the night of the gala, Maya stood in front of the mirror. Lena had pinned her hair up, leaving a few tendrils loose. She wore cheap gold hoop earrings and her mother's locket. She looked expensive, but inside she felt like a fraud. The Royal Palm Hotel was dripping with money. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen explosions. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that only rich people could tolerate. Maya walked into the ballroom and immediately wanted to turn around. The room was filled with women in designer gowns, Chanel, Dior, names Maya only knew from magazines. Men in tuxedos stood in clusters, swirling scotch and talking about mergers. She spotted Alina near the stage. Alina waved enthusiastically. Maya took a deep breath. She started to walk through the crowd. She felt eyes on her. People weren't looking at her with admiration. They were looking at her with confusion. Who is she? Why is she wearing that? A voice spoke beside her. It was smooth, cool, and sharp as a scalpel. The voice said, "You must be the famous Maya." Maya turned. Standing there was a woman who looked like she had been generated by an AI designed to create the perfect corporate executive. She was tall, wearing a silver sheath dress that looked like liquid metal. Her hair was a sleek black bob. Her makeup was flawless. She extended a hand. She didn't smile. She said, "Vanessa Chen, Vice President of Operations. Ethan has told me interesting things about you." Maya shook the hand. It was cold. Maya said, "Nice to meet you." Vanessa looked Maya up and down. It wasn't a casual glance. It was an appraisal. She was checking for cracks. Vanessa said, "I must say it is refreshing to see someone so unfiltered here. Usually these events are so curated. It is brave of you to wear something so vintage." The insult was wrapped in so much silk that it took Maya a second to feel the blade. Before Maya could respond, Ethan appeared. He looked devastating in a tuxedo. When he saw Maya, he stopped. He stared. He walked over, ignoring Vanessa completely. He said, "Maya, you look incredible." Maya felt a blush rise. She said, "Lena found the dress." "It is," Vanessa interrupted smoothly. She stepped closer to Ethan, placing a hand lightly on his arm, a proprietary gesture. She said, "Ethan, the board members from Tokyo are asking for you. We cannot keep them waiting. The merger depends on FaceTime." Ethan looked at Maya. He looked pained. He said, "I have to do this. Stay with Alina. I will find you in 20 minutes, I promise." He let Vanessa lead him away. Maya watched them go. Vanessa fit into this world perfectly. She matched the room. She matched Ethan. Maya walked to the bar, the open bar, thank God, and ordered a club soda. She needed a clear head. She stood near a large pillar trying to be invisible. Two men in suits were standing on the other side of the pillar. They were talking loudly, assuming the music covered their voices. One man said, "Is that the girl, the bartender?" The other man laughed. A cruel, dry sound. He said, "Yeah. Vanessa told me about her. Apparently Ethan is going through a phase, a little slumming it with the locals to feel grounded." Maya froze. Her hand gripped the glass so hard she thought it might shatter. The first man said, "It is a liability. The stock is volatile right now. If shareholders think Ethan is distracted by some charity case from the Keys, they will panic. Vanessa is worried she is going to have to clean up the mess when he gets bored. Charity case. Liability. Slumming it." The words hit Maya like physical blows. She wasn't a person to them. She was a story. A quirky little anecdote Ethan would tell at parties in 5 years. "Remember that week I played regular person?" Tears pricked her eyes. Not tears of sadness. Tears of rage. She set the glass down on a waiter's tray. She wasn't going to wait 20 minutes. She wasn't going to wait to be discarded. She turned and walked toward the exit. She moved fast, her heels striking the marble floor with a sharp rhythm. Ethan's voice called out over the crowd. "Maya, wait." She didn't stop. She pushed through the heavy glass doors and out into the humid Miami night. Ethan caught her at the valet stand. He grabbed her arm gently. He said, "Maya, where are you going? We haven't even had dinner." Maya spun around. She ripped her arm from his grip. She said, "I am not hungry. And I am not a liability, Ethan." Ethan looked confused. He said, "What? Who said that?" Maya stepped into his space. She poked him in the chest with a manicured finger. She said, "Your people, your world, I heard them. To you I am a quaint little adventure, a story about a storm. But to me, this is my life. That bar is my blood. My dignity is not something you get to try on because you are bored with being rich." Ethan shook his head. He looked desperate. He said, "Maya, no, that is not what this is. I care about you." Maya laughed. It sounded broken. She said, "Do you? Because you left me standing there with the sharks while you went to talk money. You fit in there, Ethan, with Vanessa, with the people who think I am a joke." She signaled to the valet who was bringing up Lena's beat-up Honda Civic. She opened the car door. She looked at him one last time. She said, "Go back inside. The air conditioning is better in there." She got in the car and drove away. Ethan stood on the curb, watching her taillights disappear into the traffic. Behind him, Vanessa watched from the doorway, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. The seed had been planted. Now she just had to watch it grow. Silence in the 21st century is not quiet. It is the absence of a notification. It is a phone screen that stays dark. It is a text message that says read at 10:14 p.m. and remains unanswered for 3 days. For Maya, the silence was deafening. At Whitmore Technologies, 40 floors above the Miami pavement, the silence was different. It was the hum of expensive air conditioning and the soft tap of fingers on glass keyboards. Ethan sat in his office. It was a glass box in the sky, sterile and cold. Across from him sat Vanessa. She placed a manila folder on his desk. She did not slide it aggressively. She placed it with the gentle concern of a doctor delivering a bad diagnosis. She said, "I hate to be the one to show you this, Ethan, but as head of operations, I have a duty to protect the firm from external risks." Ethan looked at the folder. He didn't want to open it. He wanted to be back on the beach, smelling the salt and the lime, listening to Maya talk about saving her neighborhood. He asked, "What is this?" Vanessa sighed, a perfectly rehearsed sound of regret. She said, "I ran a standard background check. We do it for anyone getting close to the family. It is protocol." Ethan opened the folder. The first page was a bank statement. Saltwater Soul LLC. It showed a negative balance. It showed 3 overdue notices from the bank. Vanessa said, "She is drowning, Ethan. $50,000 in debt. The bank is foreclosing in 2 months." Ethan felt a twist in his gut. He said, "A lot of small businesses have debt." "That doesn't mean," Vanessa pointed to the second page. It was a screenshot from Maya's social media dated 3 weeks before the hurricane. It was a picture of a vision board. In the center, in big red marker, was written, "Manifesting abundance. Goal, secure major investor by October." Vanessa leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper. She said, "Look at the date, Ethan." She posted that before the storm. She was looking for a whale. And then conveniently, a billionaire washes up on her doorstep. Ethan stared at the image. Logic, cold and sharp, began to cut through his memories. He remembered Maya refusing the cash. Was it a tactic? The long con, make him chase her so the payout would be bigger. He remembered her pitch about the community hub. Was she selling a dream or just trying to get him to sign a check? Vanessa watched him. She saw the doubt take root. She said, "I am sorry, Ethan. She is charming, but she is desperate. And desperate people are dangerous." Ethan closed the folder. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the desk felt final. He picked up his phone. He looked at Maya's name. He thought about calling her, asking her, but the data was right there. And Ethan Whitmore trusted data more than he trusted his own heart. He put the phone down, face down. 1 week later, the invitation came from a leaner, not Ethan. Whitmore Tech board room, 2 p.m. "I have arranged for you to pitch your community hub proposal to the Angel Investor Committee. Don't be late." Maya stood in the elevator of the Whitmore building. She was wearing a black blazer she had bought at the thrift store for $12 and a pair of dress pants that Lena had ironed until they were razor sharp. She was terrified. She hadn't heard from Ethan in 10 days. The ghosting had hurt more than the debt. It made her question everything. Was I just a vacation fling? But a leaner had offered her a chance, and Maya Torres did not throw away chances. The elevator doors slid open. The conference room was massive. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking the ocean. Around the long mahogany table sat 6 men in gray suits, and at the head of the table sat Ethan. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. When Maya walked in, he flinched. He hadn't known she was coming. To his right sat Vanessa. Her smile was thin and sharp as a paper cut. Elena sat at the far end. She winked at Maya. Maya took a deep breath. She walked to the front of the room. She set up her presentation board, old school, cardboard and photos, no fancy digital slides. She began to speak. She didn't use corporate buzzwords. She talked about Mrs. Rodriguez's son, who learned to code on a library computer and now worked for NASA. She talked about the crime rate dropping when youth programs were funded. She talked about the soul of a neighborhood. She said, "This isn't charity. This is an investment in human capital. The return on investment isn't just money. It is loyalty. It is stability. It is the future. When she finished, the room was silent. The investors looked impressed. One of them, an older man with glasses, nodded slowly. He said, "The numbers on the operational costs are lean." "Very impressive, Miss Torres." Then Vanessa spoke. She didn't look at the board, she looked at Ethan. She said, "It is a touching story. But we have to look at the messenger, don't we?" Vanessa slid a paper across the table. It was the credit report. She said, "Miss Torres, you are personally liable for over $50,000 in bad debt. Your business is weeks away from foreclosure." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The investors stopped nodding. They started looking at their papers. Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She said, "It seems to me that this isn't a community project. This is a bailout request dressed up as philanthropy. Did you think that because you befriended our CEO during a storm, we wouldn't check your financials?" Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Ethan. She waited for him to speak. She waited for him to say, "I know her. She is honest. She turned down my money." Ethan looked at the table. He looked at the folder Vanessa had given him. He didn't look at Maya. His silence was a scream. Maya felt something break inside her chest. It wasn't her heart, it was her hope. She straightened her spine. She looked at Vanessa. Then she looked at Ethan. She said, "My debt is real. I took loans to bury my father and keep his dream alive. I pay every cent on time. I eat ramen so my staff gets paid." She gathered her papers. Her hands were steady. She said, "You have billions of dollars in this room, but you are the poorest people I have ever met, because you think everyone is for sale." She looked directly at Ethan. She said, "I don't need your money, Ethan. I thought I needed you, but I see now that I couldn't afford you. The price is my dignity, and that is not for sale." She turned to leave. Alina's voice rang out. It was not the voice of a grandmother. It was the voice of a woman who had built an empire when men were still using typewriters. She said, "Sit down, Maya." Maya stopped. Alina stood up. She picked up the folder Vanessa had put on the table. She dropped it into the trash can. Alina said, "Gentlemen, the presentation is over. Please leave the room." The investors looked confused. Alina said, "Now." They scrambled, gathering their laptops and fleeing the tension. Only 4 people remained: Alina, Maya, Ethan, and Vanessa. Vanessa looked nervous. She said, "Alina, I was just doing my due diligence. We have to protect Ethan from..." Alina walked over to Vanessa. She placed a sleek tablet on the table. She said, "Due diligence. That is a funny phrase, Vanessa." "Because I did some of my own." Alina tapped the screen. A spreadsheet appeared. It highlighted a series of transactions. Alina said, "These are transfers from the operations budget to a consulting firm in the Cayman Islands, a firm that coincidentally is registered to your brother." Vanessa went pale. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Alina swiped the screen. She said, "And this? This is an email chain where you instructed the PR team to plant stories about Ethan's erratic behavior to the board. You were tanking his stock price so you could push for a leadership vote." Ethan stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. He looked at the screen. He looked at Vanessa. The shock on his face was total. He said, You stole from the company. You sabotaged me." Vanessa stood up. Her composure cracked. She screamed, "I saved this company. While you were playing in the sand with the help, I was running the business. You are weak, Ethan. You are soft." Alina pointed to the door. She said, "You are fired, Vanessa. Security is waiting in the lobby with a box for your things. If you try to access the server, our lawyers will have you in federal prison before you can order an Uber." Vanessa looked at Ethan, waiting for him to save her, but Ethan was looking at Maya. Vanessa grabbed her purse and stormed out. The heavy door swung shut behind her. The room was quiet again. Ethan turned to Maya. He looked like a man waking up from a coma. He said, "Maya, I didn't know. He told me you were." She showed me the debt. He took a step toward her. He said, "I am so sorry. I should have trusted you." Maya looked at him. She saw the regret. She saw the pain. But she also saw the man who had sat silent while she was humiliated. She shook her head. She said, "You had the data, Ethan, but you didn't have the faith." She looked at Alina. She smiled sadly. She said, "Thank you, Alina, for the chance." Then she walked out. Ethan made a move to follow her, but Alina stepped in his path. Ethan said, "Move, grandmother. I have to go after her." Alina planted her feet. She looked up at her grandson. She said, "No, you don't get to chase her today." Ethan said, "But I love her." Alina scoffed. She said, "You loved her. Ethan, you let a jealous employee convince you she was a thief because you were too scared to believe something good could happen to you. That isn't love. That is cowardice." Ethan slumped against the table. He put his head in his hands. Alina softened slightly. She put a hand on his shoulder. She said, "You broke it, Ethan. If you want to fix it, you have to rebuild yourself first. You cannot offer her a broken man and expect her to carry the pieces." Ethan looked up. His eyes were wet. He said, "What do I do?" Alina walked to the window. She looked out at the city. She said, "You start by figuring out who Ethan Whitmore is when he isn't checking the stock market. And then, you prove it. 6 weeks is a long time in the Florida Keys. It is enough time for the tides to change 100 times. Enough time for a broken roof to be fixed." Saltwater Soul looked different. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by a vibrant turquoise mural painted by local kids. The back patio was no longer just a smoking area, it was a stage. It was 7 p.m. on a Friday. A local high school jazz band was playing. The place was packed. Maya stood behind the bar. She was tired, but it was a good tired. The kind that came from building something real. Lena walked up holding a tablet. She said, "You got another donation." Maya frowned. She said, "Who is it this time?" Lena said, "Anonymous." Again, $10,000 for the music program. Maya wiped the counter. After the gala, the money had started coming in. Grants, anonymous donations. A foundation called the Second Chance Initiative had fully funded the roof repair. Maya knew. Of course she knew. But he hadn't called. He hadn't texted. He hadn't shown up. He was keeping his distance. He was respecting her space. It was annoying. Lena nudged her. She whispered, "Don't look now, but the ghost has materialized." Maya looked up. It was raining outside, a sudden squall typical for the season. Standing in the doorway, just like the first night, was Ethan, but he wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a black t-shirt soaked through by the rain. He wasn't holding a phone. He wasn't holding a wallet. He was holding a toolbox. A red, rusty, heavy metal toolbox. He walked up to the bar. The crowd parted for him, sensing the energy. He set the toolbox on the counter. Maya crossed her arms. Her heart was hammering a rhythm against her ribs that matched the drums on stage. She said, "We have a plumber, Ethan." Ethan wiped rain from his face. He looked at her. His eyes were clear, steady. He said, "I heard the ice machine is acting up." Maya raised an eyebrow. She said, "And you know how to fix an industrial ice machine?" Ethan smiled. It was a self-deprecating, nervous smile. He said, "I spent the last 6 weeks taking a vocational course at the community college. I also learned how to drywall, and I am decent at unclogging drains." Maya stared at him. She said, "The CEO of Whitmore Tech went to trade school." Ethan shook his head. He said, "The former CEO. I stepped down. Alina is interim until we find someone else. I stayed on the board, but I am done with the day-to-day." He pushed the wet hair back from his forehead. He said, "I realized I was building things that didn't matter. I want to build things that last." He looked around the bar. He looked at the mural. He looked at the kids playing music. He said, "You were right, Maya, about everything. I was poor. I had nothing but money." He looked back at her. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't try to cross the barrier of the bar. He said, "I am not here to buy you, Maya. I am here to apply for a job. I work cheap, I am reliable, and I promise I will never check my phone during a sunset." Maya looked at the toolbox. She looked at his wet shirt. She looked at the humility in his posture. She thought about the anonymous donations. She thought about the silence he had given her, the space he had allowed her to have. She picked up a rag. She tossed it to him. She said, "The ice machine is in the back. If you break it, you buy it." Ethan caught the rag. The relief on his face was bright enough to light up the room. He said, "Yes, ma'am." He started to walk to the kitchen. Maya called out, "Ethan." He turned. Maya smiled. It was small, but it was real. She said, "You are late. Shift started 10 minutes ago." Ethan grinned. He said, "Won't happen again." As he walked into the kitchen, Lena leaned over the bar. She said, "Okay, that was smooth. Are you going to kiss him?" Maya picked up the mint pestle. She started crushing leaves for a mojito. She said, "Not yet. He has to fix the ice machine first." But as she worked, Maya felt the hurricane in her heart finally settle. The storm was over. The sun was coming out. And the ice machine, she had a feeling it was going to work just fine.